Hey HTDA, and as of today, Outworld Station is open in early access and you can get it if you want. So here is a guide to get you started in a nice and organized way, or you can just watch this and see what the game is all about. First of all, there's a little bit of a tutorial going that I'm going to skip because even though it's pretty good, it's not that interesting to watch, but you're going to end up with a small little base that looks something like this. So let me show you what is going on over here. First of all, we have an atomizer. This is a specific type of building that we can use to grab some of these asteroids with our little dude. Look at that, it's following our mouse cursor around. This is our main ship that we use to build everything. And we can toss asteroids in this atomizer, and then this will break that down into different basic resources, and those basic resources are being transported through our base, as you can see over here. Now we can store those resources in a storage unit like this, or in our main base, but that's not really what we want to do because this is a factory game after all. So in order to get some more complicated resources, we have smelters. We have 3 of them over here, as you can see. We have one making carbon into, well, carbon ore into carbon. We have one making titanium ore into titanium. And then, surprise, surprise, we have one making gold ore into, yes, you guessed it, gold. Now, this is not actually going to give us anything that we can build with because we need even more complicated materials, and this is the part where we're going to pick up from. However, one more thing to cover, we also need some power, and this is where we have solar generators. Now you actually do need to align this with the sun, and the better aligned with the sun they are, the more power they will generate. The sun does move over time. Not entirely sure why that's the case, because you would think we're actually just rotating in a orbit around the sun. But anyway, every now and then you'll need to revisit these solar generators to make sure they're still supplying enough power. But other than that, this is the basic premise of the game. You fly around, you get some of these asteroids. You can grab multiple asteroids if you want. There are some enemies out there, so you do want to be careful. You toss them in, you get some basic resources, you smelt them, and you get better resources, and that's the basis for our factory. So how do you actually do stuff in this game? Well, on the top right, you can see our current mission. We need to gather some of all the basic resources that we have just unlocked. And we can do that by expanding our space station. Now we have these connectors that kind of serve like belts, which you can easily drag and drop like this. You can move them on different levels if you want, something like this. Although it's not really necessary early on, and I wouldn't recommend doing it because it does make it a little bit harder to tell what's going on if you have multiple levels. Of course, you can also just delete buildings if you want. And we can expand this with other buildings as well. So we have production buildings. For now, we only have the smelter and the matter printer. And the matter printer is what is going to be producing the more complicated stuff. For example, the hull plating and basic frames that we also need in order to build these things. So we want to get this up and running as quickly as possible. Now, I highly recommend that you try to keep organized from the get-go in this game, because otherwise things are going to get really messy and really complex pretty early on. So, this is how I initially expanded my first factory. I have a neat little row of smelters over here, and you will notice there's a gap between these smelters, and that is because each of these smelters is making something different. We press Control, you can see that each of them is actually working. Well, these two aren't actually working because I don't have enough raw materials. But this one is making gold, this one is making the fiber, this one is making, it's a little hard to tell, but this one is making the silicon, and this one is making titanium. Now, the reason I have spread them out like this is it makes it a lot easier to expand in this direction so they don't get in each other's way. I also made a storage unit at the entrance and a storage unit kind of like near where the production units are. This is where the raw resources are coming in that go into the smelters, and this storage unit is connected, well, it should be connected to every single one of these smelters. The reason for this being is that I can just send all the raw resources into this storage unit, and it will automatically distribute it between everything else, so I don't need to hook up everything in a complex way. Similarly, this storage unit is here to collect all the materials that these units are producing. Then I have another 3 buildings over here. These are the 3 matter printers that we need to make the basic frames, the hull plating, as you can see, and the composite. Now, you mainly need these 2 for the hull plating and the basic frames first, because you need these frames and platings for pretty much everything at this point. So you want to make sure you're producing these pretty much non-stop. And in order to do that, I have once again set up a similar storage facility. So this is where the raw resources are coming in. So this one is actually just linked to this one over here. So the bars are being produced over here, they're being sent to this one, and then this one is sending them. Again, it should be connected to everything. I didn't apparently do that yet, but this is going to transport, for example, now the carbon into this machine, and then everything that comes out of here is then going into this storage unit over here, and then this storage unit over here is bringing it back to our main base. You don't really need to bring everything back to your main base, but anything you use in order to build buildings, I do recommend that you actually return to your hub so you always know where to pick up your basic resources that you want to be building with. That also means that you kind of want to get rid of everything that is not a building resource in your hub, so you have enough space to fit in everything else. At this point in the game, you probably cleared out all the asteroids that were close by your base, and you might want to start exploring a little bit further. If you do, you will run into enemies, which can be either flying enemies like that or bases. Now, if you press E, you go into combat mode and you can start shooting at the enemy. Now, it's pretty easy to dodge the projectiles of the enemy. Just make sure you keep moving while you keep shooting, and try not to completely deplete your power, because if you do, you won't be able to fire for a little while, and that is kind of annoying. These plasma turrets do quite a bit of damage, so make sure you watch out for that. And once you've taken care of the enemies, make sure you loot everything that's around. If you press B, you can just instantly loot an entire box of units. And as you can see, there's quite a lot of stuff around here that you can easily go and grab. Make sure you clear out the entire base, and you can keep doing that all around. None of the enemies in the first zone will be particularly dangerous, just make sure that you don't get yourself killed along the way. Every now and then you'll get a warning that there's a meteor strike coming in, and if that's the case, again, just go to combat mode, watch out where the meteor is coming from, and go and shoot at it. If you destroy it, sometimes it will drop a core. Yep, it did so this time around. And this has a lot of valuable stuff in it, so make sure you drop it into your atomizer. Don't let this core float around near to your base, because after a while it does explode and it can take out parts of your base. You can always repair that, but it's kind of annoying if that happens, so just keep an eye out for those floating cores. Once you've had your matter printers up and running for a little bit and you supplied them with enough raw materials from asteroids, you get the next quest that is going to ask you to make nanoplating, reinforced frames, and artificial diamonds. And this is where the factory in the factory game really starts to pop, because we're going to need yet another new machine in order to do this. First up, we're going to keep things nicely organized and symmetric. And that means we now have 5 smelters up and running. We have a smelter making the new molecular binding. Now this is also made from silica, just like I think it's over here. What was it? Yeah, over here I have another smelter making glass fiber. So there's actually 2 different machines using this as a base input. If you want to prioritize one over the other because you're running low on one of these materials, you can set the priority in the advanced settings. And if you set this, for example, to 2, this means that this one will be more important than any machine set to 1, so this will get most of the materials. Generally speaking, you can keep them all at the same priority, because otherwise you are going to be starved on the other resource, but it is something you can use to easily make sure that you're getting some more of a particular resource. Other than that, as you can see, I expanded the matter printer section here a little bit. What I like to do is make sure you have a row of at least 5 of the same machine, so you can expand these if you want. We're not going to do that straight away, it's just a waste of materials, but we are going to have to do that pretty soon. As you can see, I'm also making 5 different types of things now. So we are making the fiber optics over here from the fiber, we're making the plates and the frames. We're also still making the carbon, and here we go. We are now making the artificial diamonds that we're going to need for part of this quest. In order to complete the other 2 items, we're going to need to make the new machine, which is the fabricator. The fabricator uses 2 types of input, as you can see, in order to make the various things that we need. So the nanoplating, for example, uses both the hull plating and molecular bonding. Now, most of the stuff we're going to be using with these fabricators is going to come from these matter printers over here, so it makes sense to kind of connect these up. And again, I set 1 storage unit to receive all the incoming items that are going to be used in here, and 1 storage unit to collect all the outgoing items in the reverse. In the long run, you're going to run out of throughput in your in your belts, in your sections of your space station. We're going to fix that, but for the moment this is not an issue, so don't worry about it too much just yet. I've set a fabricator up for both types of materials that we need, and we are already making all the basic materials, so all we need to do is make sure that these matter printers are not just sending their stuff back to the hub, but also sending it back to this storage unit as an input. So I click here, I connect this one over here. Now half of all the matter, all the plating that this is going to be producing is going to go into the storage unit and then back into the hub. And the other half is going to go into this storage unit and be used for the fabricators. In order to expand in an efficient way, I recommend that you fully configure one of your matter printers before you start copying it, or any other of the machines that you're going to copy, including all of the links. So for example, this matter printer over here is now connected to both the storage units that need to comply. It has the incoming materials, etc, etc. So if I now go to this machine and I press Ctrl C, I can just copy it and then expand like so. Now I have 3 of them, and each of those will come with the same connections as the one we've copied. But if you do it in the reverse, if you first build these machines, then it's actually a lot harder to copy these settings. So it's just a little bit less work if you do it like this. You can apply the same to any of the other things that we need. For example, the smelters we have over here. Maybe we want some additional of these bonding materials, then we can just start copying this like so. And there we go, now we have 3 times as much production. Now keep an eye on everything that you need. So for example, we need a lot of plates and hulls, so that means that that's the main thing we are going to start expanding on. But of course, because we have a lot more of these machines now, we also want some more smelters making titanium bars. So all in all, you do need to really balance your production. And also, if you want to make perfect ratios, keep in mind that you want to overshoot your target a little bit. Because remember, we're not just using, for example, these plates over here for the nanoplates, but we're also using them to build everything else. So we want a surplus production so we can actually keep building ourselves as well. At the same time, at this point in the game, don't worry too much about ratios because you don't have infinite resources yet anyway. We're still dragging in those little asteroids, we're dumping them into the atomizer and making sure we get the resources that way. Don't worry, that's not going to last forever, but for now, since we haven't everything automated, it doesn't really make a lot of sense to spend too much time on the ratios either. As a side note, if you're wondering what this is, you can actually find ships as well once you are destroying enemies and capturing their bases. These ships are not being used for anything in the factory. These are just going to count towards certain objectives that we need to make. These are taxi ships, as you can see. They're kind of civilian ships that we're making for our boss, you could say. So we're not able to fly these around, but don't worry, we actually are going to get our own ships that do fly around and do stuff for us later on. Speaking of enemies, at this point you also get access to the artifact analyzer. This is going to allow you to access your technology tree, but in order to get anything done in that technology tree, we're going to need alien artifacts. In order to get these artifacts, you're going to want to find these derelict ships that are all around the map. There's a lot of them, so they shouldn't be too hard to find, and they typically come with a little bit of defense in terms of a couple of ships that you need to destroy, but once you get access to them, you will be able to dump some resources in them. It's random which resources these are, but they typically can either be found close by in other bases and things like that, or you can just produce them yourself. Then put them in, you can unlock the ship, and you may find either an alien artifact or more advanced resources. So for example, right now I just got my composite back, so that's nice. There's some plating and even a superconductor in here as well. This is something I can't even make yet, but I already have one just to get me started. As nice as advanced the resources are, what you're really looking for are these artifacts that sometimes are found in these ships as well. You can pick them up just like any asteroid, but instead of dumping them into your atomizer, what you want to do is you want to bring them back to your hub and then put them in the alien artifact analyzer. Now this is going to take 5 minutes to register, but once you do, you can start allocating some of your skill points. As a side note, remember that you can always just double up on the scanning if it's taking too long and you find multiple artifacts. You don't need to wait around for that. Just build another one of these analyzers and you can get yourself going. Once you completed an artifact, all you need to do is click on the analyzer and you will see this tech upgrade screen over here. There's 2 types of upgrades. You can either upgrade your drone or your station. I would recommend that you focus on the drone first, because you're using it all the time, literally, although not all the upgrades are as useful. So for example, the hardened casing will increase your hit points, but as long as you're not dying, this is not actually going to do anything for you. On the other hand, things like carry weight can be useful because you can drag in more asteroids, but we don't want to manually keep grabbing asteroids for too long. So things like inventory slots, energy storage so you can fire your laser a little bit more, or just upgrading your laser to begin with, is probably where I would start. Specifically, if you're having trouble with enemies, the missile launcher will make you a lot more dangerous than you start out as, so this is definitely something to consider if that is something you are struggling with. For the station itself, the same thing kind of holds. Just make sure you pick something that you're always using. For example, you might be tempted to go for the solar cells upgrade, gives you a bit of extra power, but that is something you can also do by just building some more solar cells. So this is not something that I would recommend that you pick up. However, the high-speed connectors allow items to move around faster in your base. You're moving items around all the time and you will get bottlenecked, so 20% increased speed to that is going to be massively helpful. Other things like freighter speed increases are not that useful early on because the freighters themselves have a pretty large inventory. And things like hit points and output for miners. Well, the miners actually, we'll see them in a moment, they can be quite useful. But things like hit points, again, as long as your things are not blowing up, then there's no reason to pick this up. Anyway, here we go. This is starting to look like a real space station as well as a real factory. There's a lot of stuff moving around in here, and there's a massive amount of resources going on. And we're producing quite a few complex items already, but of course we want to fully automate this because, well, as fun as dragging these asteroids into the atomizer is, it's not something I want to keep doing for more hours than I need to. As a side note, I also upgraded the energy storage at this point a little bit. Make sure you're always producing enough power, but it's also worth putting in some of these energy storage units because this will just absorb any surplus production that you have, basically making sure you don't need to go and align these solar generators all the time. You only need to do this when you actually completely run out of power. Every now and then you will also get some of these optional missions that you can safely ignore. Typically they don't give you anything of interest, but if you do want some free resources, well, you might as well just go out and kill some enemies. You're going to do that anyway, and specifically the enemy kill quests I think are quite nice to do because, well, it takes just a minute and you get some free resources. However, the main thing you now want to focus on is getting the Aeon hoppers, those taxi ships, up and running and in production, as well as computers, because after that we're going to be able to fully optimize our base. So in order to do that, we're going to need some more of these fabricators. I have one over here that is making the circuit boards from the fiber optics as well as the gold, and then we have another one that is making the circuit boards and the fiber optics into computers. That is one item down that we need for our list, but it's also going to be used to make our ships. In order to make ships, what we also need are some engines, and we're going to make those from hull plating and composite. So remember, we're going to need yet more hull plating, so make sure you upgrade your production if you feel you're running low. At the same time, I also recommend that you start making your storage a little bit more smart. You can set your storage to receive specific items. Now, let me use this empty one to show you how to do this in an efficient way. I would start by going to the advanced mode, clicking on this, keeping this on default, but also disabling this particular slot and then copying it to all. What this does is that you have now blocked all the storage in this particular storage unit. Now we are going to unblock this one by one. Let's say we want gold to be stored here as well. We can now set this to gold, and this will make sure there's always some space for gold. Now, if you look at this one, this is where I have already done that. This is going to receive all kinds of different materials, but these are actually only materials that are actually used in these machines. That means that if I link up, for example, the hub to this storage, there might be things in my hub that are actually not used here, so I don't want my hub to send, say, titanium ore to this storage unit because that has no business being here. So by blocking all the other slots, I can make sure that only items I actually want to be here get transported to the storage. The game is smart about that, so it's kind of useful to have those filters in place. You could do that with the output as well. I don't think you really need to. So for the output slots, I would typically just say, okay, just select them all, just have them set to default enabled, and then copy it to all, and then just have this store or whatever. But if you want to make sure that it doesn't overflow on one particular item, there's room for at least a single stack of each of these items. Of course, you can block these up as well. Now, I can't stress this enough. That kind of filtering in your storage will make it a lot easier to keep your base organized and not run into too much bottlenecks, and also not have like random items flowing through your base in all different directions. Because as you can see, it is already getting quite busy in here, and this will only get worse once we start actually automating things. Because those fabricators all slurp up quite a bit of resource, you want to expand your smelting production a little bit more. And again, you can see now why it is so important to stay organized from the get-go, because it's really easy to tell how much of everything you have, and just by smart copying this, you don't need to do a lot of work to set everything up. At the same time, you also want to make sure your meta printers are expanded, so you can see I am starting to fill up this area quite nicely over here. And when it comes to the fabricators, maybe setting up 2 of the fabricators to make circuit boards is nice, because you need the circuit boards for the computers, but you also want some spare circuit boards because you need them to unlock like derelict ships and things like that as well. But the real building of interest is now this small shipyard that is going to make our Aeon hoppers. You do this by adding something to the queue like this, and then pressing this repeat button over here, so you don't need to queue up manually every time. Now, you do want to make sure you're not overproducing these ships, because like I said, you are not using these ships yourself, you're making them for the objective only. So there's no point in building 20 of these if you only need 5. So make sure you stop building them once you have enough. And then of course start stacking up on the computers, because as you can see, these computers are being used for the ships. So again, that's another reason not to start overproducing these. Oh, there are some meteors coming in. And as you can see, they do damage to your base if you're ignoring them. However, you can just press G, start repairing your base if anything gets damaged, and you're back up and running. While you're waiting for your ships to be built, what you want to do is start exploring, because you're specifically looking for nodes now. These nodes are where you can start building some miners. Let me show you. We have a miner building now that we can put on top of these nodes. And once you've placed one down and you make sure it's powered up, it will start producing an infinite amount of resources for you to be used. An early mining facility will look something like this. There's some energy storage to make sure you don't have to run back every time the solar cells get misaligned. You want some solar cells to produce plenty of power, along with some surplus, so you can actually store something in those energy storages. And you want some storage units. You just link up your miner to these different storage units in turn, and then you will have all of the resources collecting in the last one in the row. And now you can just pick up a whole stack of titanium ore, put it in your storage unit in your main base. It's a lot better and more convenient than doing this manually by finding random rocks flying around in the air. But of course, this is still manual work, so we want to start looking into automation. However, don't be afraid to just go out and explore and find as many of these nodes as you can, and build a similar facility like we've just done over here on the different types of nodes. You want one on carbon, you want one on gold, you want one on titanium, and you want one on silica. And then you have all the 4 basic resources covered. And yeah, you still need to fly yourself between these miners and your main base, but at least you'll have all the resources you're going to need to progress further into the game. Once you get a couple of those mining stations up and running, you should have enough of those hoppers to complete the 4th quest, and you get a 5th quest to produce some more of them. But you're also going to need to produce superconductors and couriers. And at this point, superconductors are very resource intensive, so we want to automate all our production lines, and we can, because we just got access to the freighter dock. Now, in a freighter dock, you can build freighters, surprisingly. And you want to set up a freighter dock at every single location where you're using these base resources. Give them a name. So in this case, what am I producing over here? We're producing something out of silica. So we could say this is the silica drop. And then you go to the mining station where you're producing that, and you're going to set one of those up there as well, which should look something like this. Another freighter dock. Don't forget to actually link the storage unit to the dock, so you now have all your resources flowing into this dock ready for transport. And then all you need to do is go to your freighter station, and then build a freighter in there and select that freighter, and you can tell it where to pick up stuff from and where to drop it off. So in this case, we are going to pick up silicon from the silicon factory, and then we're going to drop it off right over here in our base. And if we now unselect it, there it goes. It's immediately launched, and it will start flying up and down between those two stations and deliver all the silica we can get. Now again, don't forget to link your silica up to wherever it needs to go. So in this case, we're going to be using silica in 2 places. So over here for the base production of the fiber, but we're also using it for the other thing over here. What was it called again? Molecular bonding. So by linking it up to these 2 storage units, both of these supply lines will now produce infinite amount of stuff, because the mines won't run out, and neither will therefore this production line. And of course you want to do this for every single one of the base resources, and if you've been following my design, you should be able to fit these in nice and tight over here. And this is again why I left some space in between these production lines, because the freighter docks fit in quite nicely once you do that. Now, it's worth noting that we have 4 base resources over here, but we're actually using 5 of these docks. And you might be wondering, is this dock then also bringing in silica? Well, actually no, this one is bringing in the carbon, but the carbon is just being transported over here to the carbon facilities. It's actually over here. I can't fit in any dock over here, of course, because we have the throughput here to the main base and the rest of the facility, but all in all, that's not really a problem. Now, you will notice that your throughput is going to get bottlenecked just by the sheer amount of stuff you're producing. Now, there's an easy way around this, because we now have more than 1 station. You could also redesign this station, by the way, but I kind of like the looks of it. So rather than just removing the old production, I just want to keep this up and running, but expand on the existing production as well. And you can very easily do that by dedicated factories. For example, over here I have a miner that is mining some silica. Now this is mining 120 silica per minute. That's enough to feed 4 smelters making fiber. And these fiber smelters will be enough to feed into the fiber optic matter printers over here, with 4 of them as well. And that's going to produce about 100 fiber optics per minute in this dedicated factory. So that means if I connect a freighter dock to that, I can now bring this fiber optics wherever I need to go without any bottlenecks occurring, because there's nothing that can get in the way over here. And you can do something similar for other production lines as well. For example, over here I have a titanium miner making enough titanium for 4 smelters once again, but these 4 smelters are feeding into 2 matter printers, making just the basic frames. So we're going to need the frames for a lot of things, so it makes sense to have a dedicated production line for that, and again, a freighter dock will allow me to transport that wherever it needs to go. And doing that a few times around the map means you can just bypass all of these production lines in your main factory. These are still useful, remember, because we do need those base materials to do our own building, but we can also bring in an additional supply of all of that stuff into this fabricator drop dock I have over here. That fits nicely in the open space we left behind. And that means that I can now get things like fiber optics and those platings that we saw before, and the frames, etc. And I can just have that delivered into this facility where I need it to go. Because remember, I do need a lot of these plates, frames, and things like that, and especially fiber optics as well, because it's used in like 3 different things over here. So having a dedicated fabrication line and having ships deliver it to the fabricators rather than having it go around my entire base is a lot more efficient, and this should give you a basic idea of how you can further expand later on in the game as well. Well, I don't know about you, but this is starting to look like an actual space station and a proper production line as well. Look at all of that stuff moving around. I really like the ships now flying around as well. It really gives you that space vibe. And remember, I've been building everything flat, but you can actually build in 3D as well. You can build several layers of a space station. I haven't really found the need to do that, but let's say we wanted to double up on this production, we can just build a second line on top of that, and that is one way to move forward. With all of this production up and running, it shouldn't take you too long to build the remaining ships and superconductors, and you can complete the quest, and look at that. They all take off in different directions in order to complete that quest, so that's a really nice touch. We unlock a boatload of new stuff. We can start upgrading things like storage and freighter docks, etc, etc. But all of that will have to wait until the next episode. I think by now you've probably been playing for maybe 1 or 2 evenings, depending on how long you get to play every evening, I guess. But as you can see, we are now just getting to the meat of the game, and that is something I will of course help you out with as well, but you'll need to just wait for the next episode for that. If you're still here, you're awesome. Don't forget to like and subscribe if this was useful to you, and I hope to catch you in the next one.